Hi guys, it's Jamie here. Welcome to tutorial 2 in the mark making challenge being run by Zern in Art Tribe. In the last video, I wasn't 100% happy with the results because I felt I'd used too many highly patterned papers in the background collage. To prepare for this tutorial, I have cut less patterned papers, but still in the beiges and the browns that were used in the first tutorial. As per the first tutorial, I'm using elements from my scrapbooks, leftover pieces from previous journals, and my heavy gel matte medium to adhere those pieces to my art journal. As I am taking a slightly different approach to mark making in this tutorial, I wanted to do a bit of research into how mark making has evolved, why it's currently so popular, and how it's used in contemporary art. It is mostly used with collage, which is what we're learning currently in Art Tribe. And the idea behind mark making is to breathe some dynamism, some fire into the collage, some movement or action, particularly when the collage is very abstract, which is what we're using as backgrounds. As you know, I am a fan of collage art in many different forms. I've never really done it in this format except in masterboards in junk journals. But basically, collage art is assembling various materials, which is why I use different textures in my backgrounds, and even objects, and placing them on a surface, which could obviously be canvases, a wooden board, or in this case, an art journal. Some people have a very superior attitude towards collage art, but actually, if we look back in the history of it during the 20th century, artists like Pablo Picasso and Georges Braque were pioneers in the field, challenging many conventional notions of art. What is interesting to me about Pablo Picasso is, having visited his museum in Barcelona, his very early pieces from being an art student were traditional pen and pencil drawings and paintings. He was an extremely natural and talented and gifted artist who just pushed the boundaries of art as he developed and matured. And while some of us do not have the drawing skills of Pablo Picasso, we are in ourselves trying to evolve as artists and embrace new techniques and materials in Art Tribe to create something that we are content with within ourselves and is visually captivating and perhaps even thought-provoking. The way mark making plays into this is it refers mainly to an act of creating deliberate and expressive marks on the collage or the surface background. And as we have seen with Zern's examples and examples from other Art Tribe members, the marks can be from everyday objects. It can include things like pencils, pens and brushes, but also more what might be considered unconventional objects such as sticks, sponges, household or industrial or natural items that create some kind of patterning when paint has been brushed over the surface and then that surface has been applied to the collage. The aspect that I find fascinating about the mark making is, unless you experiment and practice off-piece, you're never quite sure what mark you're going to get or how clearly it will print. And I find joy in that because we can no longer strive for perfection, which can often be the downfall when people pursue art, particularly people who are challenged with their drawing abilities, such as myself. We sometimes feel very limited and that we can't get what we're looking for in our mind's eye. Using mark making takes that perfectionism pressure off us whilst we just create. And in fact, I found this process incredibly quick So whereas with a lot of the things I've done before in terms of tutorials for you guys have taken 1, 2 or even 3 days to complete a piece, this particular art form is taking me an hour to 2 hours, and that's allowing for drying times, coffee breaks, my usual procrastination and pottering about. So while in this piece I still use objects that were available to me, there are other forms of mark making that you can use. For example, when using paint or a pencil or some ink in a dropper, you could try doing cross-hatching, stippling, abstract brush strokes. I've seen a YouTube artist, Robin McClellan, I think her name is, who just free does these almost Chinese calligraphy brush marks across pieces, and it all creates a unique and dynamic aspect to each piece of work that they do. Despite not necessarily knowing the result of the prints that you put on top of the collage, you can be quite deliberate where you place the mark making and have it complement the background that you're using. I spoke in tutorial 1 about how I try to balance the pieces of the collage that I'm using, particularly on diagonals, so that you might have repeating papers to give the background some kind of unity when I'm using so many different textures and shades within a specific colourway. So while I was putting this background together, I had an idea of where I wanted to place my marks and particularly what colours I wanted to use in the mark making. So having got a background that I think is a little bit plainer than my previous attempt, I'm just finishing it off by adding a layer of the heavy gel matte medium over the top of everything that I've put down, and then letting that dry off while I prepare materials to make marks and actual colours that I'm going to use. Having used a piece of cardboard corrugated style on the actual collage, I decide the first thing I want to do is to use a very dark brown acrylic paint and another piece of the corrugated cardboard to make some marks on that background. And for once, if you've seen any of my previous tutorials, I actually acted quite sparingly, whereas normally I go quite over the top and maybe even overdo the amount of work that I'm putting into something. Rather than have a real leaf, I've decided to use a plastic leaf from a set of craft leaves that my daughter bought me for Christmas that I haven't really used in any other project, and I'm just painting over that leaf with a dark green acrylic paint. My initial hope was this would actually print up with a leaf shape, and I was disappointed that it didn't. However, I did persist with the idea of using the craft leaves because 1, I'd started it, and 2, I was interested to see what I would end up with. Therefore, what I said at the beginning of this tutorial about not necessarily having a final result in your mind's eye really came to fruition with this particular painting process. The only thing I did know was that I was going to use 3 different shades of green, so I continued with that plan. My initial idea had been that I would create a foliage style border. Obviously that didn't quite work out, but I did still leave some space in the middle of the collage that was empty, non-mark making space. Where I had been sparing with the cardboard mark making, I was not particularly sparing with this leaf application. The only frustration I had here was I wanted to be closer to that border edge, but I felt if I tried to do that, I'd get too much paint on my nicely drawn Barbara style framing. I do go a little bit over, I'm not that careful. And of course my hands got extremely messy and covered with green paint using this style of application. The idea behind the cardboard mark making and also the leaf print was to create this idea of using the mark making to bring attention to a focal point. The focal point I had in mind was a spare fussy cut from our Tropical Creator Club kit, that of a parrot. So whilst this is abstract in the form of the background, I was going for this sense of modern jungle. However, where I initially wanted to place the parrot the first time round didn't actually work, so I end up placing him on top of that piece of plain cardboard, like he's almost sitting on a perch, which would make him a jungle domesticated parrot. So while this piece didn't quite work out as I intended, in a sense it's more abstract than my initial vision, and I'm reasonably happy with the results of attempting to bring a focal point in and use some different colours in the mark making. I hope you enjoyed that short tutorial and it's encouraged you to try some mark making in some different colours, and I will see you next time.